So this is the I Am ABE Virtual Day on the Hill kickoff event. You know, things will be a little different than they are ordinarily. We're calling this more of a kickoff event since we're not in person actually talking to legislators today, but it's going to be sort of more of an ongoing effort to engage those legislators. Oh, I should turn on my camera. Nope, it's on. Okay, great. So my name is Chris Kloss, and I am part of I Am ABE. I'm also a GED instructor at the Hub Center. And my pronouns are they, them, and theirs. And I just want to welcome everybody to our kickoff event this evening. Thank you so much for giving up your time on such a gorgeous, unexpected day of spring weather, and doing something so important, preparing to engage our learners in advocacy for our programming. We just want to get a gauge on reasons why this is important to you and why you might be here. So I think, Sarah, if you want to launch that poll, you can give us an idea of what it is that you came to get out of our meeting today. So are you hoping to walk away with resources to get your students involved, how you personally can get involved? If you're interested in hearing what Minnesota legislators have to say, learning more about how funding works in ABE, or hearing from an ABE lobbyist. We do have Sherry here with us. So I'll give a little bit of time for folks to respond to that survey. Usually like to wait until the responses get up over 75%. That's usually a good gauge. And we're up to 83, so oh, we went down to 78. I think that's probably good. It looks like a lot of you are here to hear what Minnesota legislators have to say, which is great. We will hear a little bit later on, and also how we can personally get involved in advocating for ABE. So that's great as well. So the next thing I just want to go through quickly is our agenda for today. And so we will talk a little bit about who is it that advocates for ABE. Then we'll hear from those legislators. And then we do have a panel from a few members of Literacy Action Network who can talk a little bit today about the advocacy process and how you can get involved. And then we're hoping that you'll leave today with some really concrete action steps that you can take, you know, kicking that off here today, but then also moving forward, what we can all be doing to advocate for ABE. We will have a 15-minute break at 5:30. And then we're gonna get back together for 2 breakout sessions. And that 15-minute break will sort of let us reset things, make sure everybody's in the right breakout room, and then be ready to go. So hopefully you'll get a chance to stretch your legs, maybe get out of your chair. I know a lot of us have been in back-to-back video calls throughout the day. So speaking of who advocates for ABE, we do have 2 organizations represented here today, I Am ABE and the Literacy Action Network. I Am ABE is really a group of teachers who want to engage other teachers as well as students in advocating for adult basic ed. You know, we recognize that teachers are sort of on the front lines. We're the ones in the classroom, and so we see the needs that our programs have, and we know, we can see what the solutions are, and often are some of the best people to talk about what those needs are. Students are the most important part of our programs. They're the reason our programs exist. And so we also think it's really important to engage students in advocacy work and also provide the knowledge and the tools that they need to get involved in the process. Sometimes the biggest barrier is just not knowing how you can get involved. And so IMABE makes it a goal to amplify students' voices in any ways that we can, beginning with the education piece of learning what the advocacy process is, and then bringing it all the way to fruition with getting engaged in advocacy. Literacy Action Network is a member organization in ABE in Minnesota, and the legislative committee, we have a couple representatives from the legislative committee here today, does a lot of that sort of in-person, feet on the ground engagement with legislators and advocating for specific platforms and legislation to keep moving ABE forward. And then finally, legislators are a really important part of the advocacy process, as we're able to represent our needs to them. Then they're the ones who are actually making those laws and policies for our state. And so we want to make sure that they're part of this process and that we're engaging them throughout. So we just want to give kind of a quick 2020 recap. This has been such an eventful year. And today is actually the anniversary of our last day on the Hill. So March 9th, 2020 was our in-person event, where we did have a lot of student field trips happening at the Capitol, and students and teachers and other ABE professionals advocating. So just quickly, that day on the Hill, we had 18 schools and organizations who signed up to participate, and a total of 156 students who, you know how attendance is, but we're estimated to participate and in field trips and also in in-person meetings with legislators. And then things quickly changed. So we all retooled and were creative in how we were able to continue engaging students, and gained a lot of skills at remote instruction. And then also right here in the Twin Cities, George Floyd was murdered in June of last year. And so in response, IMABE put together a letter committing to work toward racial justice in ABE. And to sort of summarize all that was in that letter, we sort of boiled that down to 4 guiding statements: that everyone is capable of learning, everyone has a right to learn, everyone brings knowledge into the classroom, and all varieties of English are legitimate. And these were sort of guideposts for us as we start to think about racial justice and racial equity in ABE. We had 12 organizations who signed on to that letter, most of which were right here in Minnesota, but some other organizations got wind of our commitment and signed on from other states in the US, and a few organizations around the globe as well. And 137 individuals, teachers, and others involved in adult education signed on to the letter as well. And I think Erin is dropping some links into the chat with this graphic with all these updates in it, links to these things, including this letter and so on. So if you're interested in taking a closer look at that letter, you can follow that link. These are the other organizations that did sign on to that. So we just want to give a huge thank you to these organizations for their commitment to this work. One of the first projects that came out of that commitment was development of some ABE professional affinity groups. One working towards anti-racism, and another working to build a space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are working professionals, teachers, and other roles in ABE, so that we can make ABE a place that attracts, retains, and supports BIPOC professionals. We know that such a large proportion of our students are people of color, and we want to make sure that our staffing reflects that. And one way to do that is to build a safe and supportive workforce. We also started an LGBTQ plus a queer affinity group for ABE, a group for teachers organizing around mental health, and then a group for non-native English speakers who are professionals in ABE. And I've seen some of the work coming out of each of these groups, and it's really been exciting to see how teachers are, these are really grassroots groups of professionals deciding their priorities and what to do from there and how to grow together. And the work has been really encouraging. So here we are preparing for some advocacy, and obviously the Day on the Hill being virtual is one of the big, what has come out of our work in 2020. But of course, as it becomes possible to meet in person again, we will continue to do so and then engage in digital advocacy as well. So I am now going to turn things over to Kaya, who is going to talk a little bit about the land impact report.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Kaya, she, her, and I work with Neighborhood House. And in addition to the information that Chris shared about IMABE, LAN also puts out an impact report that some of you may be familiar with. We often get it at Summer Institute. And you can find the full LAN report on the LAN website. And there's also a pandemic report that was put together specifically to focus on what happened over this past year. The impact report from LAN is a great tool if you are interested in kind of sharing some graphics or need to reach out to someone and give an overview about what ABE looks like across the state of Minnesota. Or if you're working with someone and they're like, what is ABE? It can be a good place to start to show kind of what we do as educators and programs. A couple of things to pull out from the pandemic report. We served over 55,600 students over the program year, which was a drop of only 5,000 from the previous year, which all things considered, when we had to make so many changes, is incredible. So yay, everyone who was a part of that. And as Chris mentioned, our programs adapted quickly, finding different ways to connect with our students in an environment that was really rapidly changing. Another highlight from what happened this past year in the report is ABE programs became crucial parts of the distribution chain for technology and resources. So a lot of programs were able to connect their students with hotspots, tablets, laptops. And then in addition to that, I know a lot of people did resource systems navigating with their students. Chris mentioned some of the many things that happened over 2020. Some of you may have helped your students with the census. Some of you may have helped your students with the 2020 election. You may have helped process information around the uprising and the killing of George Floyd. You're probably helping students navigate the vaccine system right now too. So some of these, not the vaccine system, but a lot of that is in the impact report and some of the graphics that Chris shared. And are things that we want to think about when we're telling the story of ABE and why the work we do matters we do matters and how we can connect that to the goals of legislators or other people who might be making decisions around our programming. So we'd like to take a minute right now and go back, give you a chance to share in the chat any other updates that you can share, things you'd celebrate, things that you can think of that you'd pull out as highlights from your program or your consortium that tell the story of what your programming looks like. And let's see. Because I don't know if we wanted to stay on that page or if we're ready to move to the next one, but.
Yeah, I think we can go back. I'm not sure. The computer really wants to go to the next slide.
Okay. So
if you want to navigate back, go right ahead.
All right, I'll try and figure that out. But yeah, so Heather shared in Minneapolis, we've seen a large number of HSE students, especially in evening programming, which is awesome. I think one of the sort of paradoxes we've seen is in the way that we've lost students because of our shift to technology and virtual classes, we've also gained students that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Yeah, and Susan says, thanks for calling out the digital equity work, Kaya. That's been a huge project that few of us anticipated taking on. Yeah, I agree with that. And truly, I was in the unregional conference earlier, I guess that was last week. And some folks were sharing the innovative ways that their programs have adapted, and I was very impressed. Yeah, Heather says many students want to continue with online learning. It helps those with families. Erin shares, proud we're still going strong. Implementation of a brand new remote learning system, supplementing students' food security, frank discussions about the uprisings after George Floyd's murder. Yeah. Rosalind says, at Lindale Neighborhood Association, we are about to launch a digital literacy ESL class for seniors in public housing. That's awesome. Yeah. So these are just some of the stories. Oh yeah, we've got some more now, yay. As Sarah says, at the English Learning Center, we started a food shelf last year. That's amazing. Maya shares, we've offered parenting classes to help parents help their children with online learning, combating COVID myths and vaccine reluctance. Yeah, so I think that like we have all of these stories to share, and that's part of what we want to celebrate today with Day on the Hill, and also to continue passing on and getting out into the community and getting out to legislators so that they know all of the stuff that we're doing. Yeah, teachers and staff and students made huge gains in tech skills. Yeah, I agree with Monica. There's so much great work happening. And yeah, Tom says we've advocated for a more fair vaccine distribution system. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing those things and for all of the work that you're doing. And now what we have is a video with some comments from legislators. Because in our normal time, we're able to drop in and visit with legislators, but given the remote nature of this day and also the availability of legislators, we reached out to some people ahead of time and asked them to record their responses. And we're going to share those with all of you now. So here we go. And the volume should be high enough. If you're having trouble with it, you can chat us to let us know.
Never served on the education committee, but always been a strong advocate for education. And I remember when we used to call it K-12 education, and then we started calling it E-12 education because we want to get the early learners. But it doesn't stop at 12, and ABE is a huge part of it. Community education, especially for immigrants and new Americans who need these skills. Others who, for other reasons, didn't get an education when they were younger and coming back to get an education. We really desperately need to include all of that in our education model. So,
as a Black woman, as a Black mother, that there clearly have been, laws that were created that kept me and my ancestors and us and others in a place, right? And so I just wanted to, one day, I decided that I wanted to be a state legislator. I wanted to create laws that was fair, that represent all of us. And I ran because laws and policies matters. I emailed it off. And you know what happened? I got an email from them. They responded to me. And I thought, wow, I'm just this mother with 7 kids. And they responded to me, right? And so that was my first sense of activism, my first sense of, maybe what I think and say matters.
The short answer is my dad always taught me that if you see a problem you think you know how to solve, congratulations, you're now part of the solution and it's your job to go try to solve it. The long answer is that I feel like there's not enough
to
that I'm a strong person, I'm a very strong advocate, I speak loudly, and I want to make sure that get their voices heard and help them out. And you try to make the world a little better place than the way you found it. And for me, one of the most quintessential ways you can do that is through education and advocacy. So that's kind of where as a college professor, I take education very seriously, and I think it is literally the backbone of our culture and our society.
I became a commissioner in January of 2019 after a career in service to our students and our public schools. And my teaching experience really led me to realize I wanted to do more in leadership in our education system. And it's been really exciting to take that experience as a classroom teacher, as a teacher leader, and apply it as a leader of the Minnesota Department of Education.
I'm a big believer in education, grew up in a family that believes in education and see it as an information age. In so many ways, everybody needs an education. And when we see some of the threats to our democracy from internally, a lot of it relates to people not getting an education, not understanding civics, not understanding our responsibility to our neighbors and our community. So I see education as something that should be lifelong. I see it should include 100% of the population.
I guess you could say there's 3 that I'm thinking of right now. One is, what are we going to do to help folks who have been negatively affected by this pandemic? And I mean that in the sense that we already know that many of the things that were going on long before the pandemic have now just been highlighted and made worse. And so talking about the achievement gap, getting teachers of color into the school, supporting our students with mental health issues, that kind of stuff, and helping them be successful. In a broader sense, I think that we need to stop the systematic disinvestment or defunding of education in any real dollars and make a real double down commitment to increasing education funding, because all it does is give us a positive return on the investment. And then more specifically, I'm really also focused on bringing career and technical education and broadening the scope of what is post-secondary options from precision welding to philosophy, and seeing that there's lots of viable things to have or do careers, whether it's being an HVAC technician, a dental hygienist, or an engineer or a philosopher. There's all these different options out there, and we should probably value all of them and really bring that balance back to our schools.
That Due North plan prioritizes ensuring every student in Minnesota receives a high quality education, and we have a lot of work to do to get there. After the disruptions we have experienced over this past year with the COVID-19 pandemic, we absolutely need to make sure that our priorities focus on helping students both recover as well as thrive coming out of this pandemic. Additionally, our Due North education plan calls for reforms in school financing to ensure schools have the money they need to support students, to expand opportunities for students in greater Minnesota, and to build the most qualified and diverse teaching workforce in the nation.
I'm a cheerleader for ABE. I believe that every person needs good educational opportunities, and ABE provides that to so many, and to new immigrants and to people trying to start a second chance on their life out of prison or wherever the background is. This is what they need. This is their ticket to the future. And so thank you to ABE, and thank you to the students for your hard work in making your future brighter.
Our job is to make sure that we understand that education is a lifelong thing, that there aren't rules about it. I remember when I was in college, I started college late and I always thought I was behind. I didn't graduate till I was 27. And so I always felt like I was playing catch up. And the reality is there aren't any rules. And so when I talk about career and technical education, it could be retooling an adult that, you know, some recession knocked them out of their career, or they want to try something new, or they're just evolving as a person. When we're talking about the COVID crisis, it's making sure everybody has the opportunity to be successful after this crisis and during the pandemic. And when I talk about education, it's funding these programs that make those critical supports for our communities happen, and understanding that priority. You know, it's not like we're just throwing money away, it's an investment, and that investment always has a positive return on us, whether it's in social services, whether it's in a higher tax base, and whether it's just general well-being and happiness, right? And so I think they play a critical role in supporting adult education.
Are critical to also the success of adult basic education. And quite frankly, adult basic education is critical to the larger success of our school communities and of our economy and our communities in general. Because when you think about education, you think about how often education happens informally in a family. It happens throughout life, right? The term lifelong learner is meaningful, and perhaps no program embraces lifelong learner like adult basic education, because adult basic education recognizes that a home could have multi-generational learners in it. And we at the Department of Education, I as the Education Commissioner, want to support that multi-generational learning and want to make sure that adult basic education is as accessible to the adults in a household as our public schools are accessible to the youngest learners in a household. Adult basic education is critical for our communities. It helps grow the workforce and support our families in that way. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated disparities in education across Minnesota, especially along geographic and racial lines. That's one of the reasons that in our priorities that I've talked about, that the governor's education budget calls for an additional $10 million in one-time funding to enhance the career advancement and educational horizons through adult basic education programs at nearly 350 locations across the state. Governor's education budget also has a provision to ensure that the state total investment in ABE aid does not decline from one year to the next, providing ABE budget stability to allow for program planning, which at the end of the day is what everyone in our community needs to know that that ABE program is going to be there for them when they're ready for it.
Every student's needs are different, and I want to make sure that we address all those needs. And there are lots of times when you get trying to distill an issue down to a short slogan in politics, a bumper sticker length slogan. And there aren't many of those that make much sense. But one I do agree with is there's a bumper sticker that had been out there a number of years ago. If you think education's expensive, try ignorance. And that really says why my view of education, we ought to be investing in it. We ought to be investing heavily in it. We ought to be investing in it for everyone.
Let me tell you, I talked, through the lens of people recognizing their voice, realizing that, what they say and what they believe matters. And so that goes for teachers. In order to help like legislators or school boards, know what the challenges are and what teachers need, and the true investment that teachers make in, whether they children's lives or other adults' lives, is critically important. And it's more important to recognize that the educational system is tied to a political system. I think, it's really important for teachers who do this work, because you get it, you see it, you love it, it's what you want to do, that we also hear that.
All right. So they're not here, but a thank you to our legislators and to the folks who interviewed them as well. And now we have some in-person people. So I'm going to turn it over to Kara, who will be introducing our panel.
All right, thank you. So my name is Kara Berger. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a member of IMABE and a teacher at Neighborhood House. And I will introduce our panelists. So Tom Citron-Heisem is a consultant specializing in adult education with an emphasis on distance learning and digital literacy. He has worked on public policy issues for the field for over 20 years. He currently manages North Star Digital Literacy, facilitates the St. Paul Community Literacy Consortium, works as a consultant with the statewide Minnesota ABE Distance Learning Support Network grant, and serves as a grants manager for Literacy Action Network. He presents frequently at state and national conferences. Tom has a master's in organizational leadership from the University of St. Catharines. So welcome, Tom. And we also have Sherry Munyon, who is a Capitol and legislative veteran with more than 30 years of experience covering a broad spectrum of policy and funding areas, including being a staffer for the Minnesota Senate, the Deputy Director for the Regional Transit Board, Director of Transportation and Environmental Policy with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, then as a contract lobbyist. In 2006, Sherry started her own government relations firm, Capital Access Inc., concentrating on public safety, public transit, and transportation, and adult education. She also serves on the board of directors for Forward Global Women, which fosters the development of peacemakers by bringing together women leaders and activities from the Middle East and North Africa to share knowledge and grow skills that help advance and facilitate sustainable peace in the MENA region. So welcome, Sherry and Tom. And I think we can move on to the questions. Great, so I already kind of gave an introduction, but if there's anything else you guys would like to say about your work in ABE advocacy?
I think you pretty much covered it from my perspective.
All right, well, that's great. Oh, there's a second. I'll request control so I can bring up the questions myself, maybe. Or not? Okay, thank you. All right, so our first question then is, how long have you been involved in LAN and how has ABE advocacy priorities changed over all that time?
Well, I can say I've been involved in LAN for probably around 20 years. I was legislative chair for about 10 years and have continued to work on legislative issues, public policy and legislative issues even after that time. I think remember getting involved first time around the year 2000 when the current formula was adopted by the legislature. And I would say the first period of time was very much involved with protecting the formula and keep letting it play its way out. As time went on, I think we got more concerned with additional funding as inflation sort of ate away at the amount of money that we were given in the budget. I've had some success in that area, not as much as I would hope for. And then certainly we have become involved in some other issues, such as the Coalition to Increase Teachers of Color and some similar things that have a social or anti-racist or equity perspective and are not just directly related to funding, but related to how we do the work that we do and why that work we do has been so important. Sherry, did you want to say something?
Yep, thank you. And so I've been involved for, I'm not even sure, Tom, has it been about 12 years working with literacy, at least, working with Literacy Action Network, and it's been fantastic. And I would say one of the interesting things has been that advocacy at the Capitol from legislators isn't always related to their political party. So we've had committee chairs that have been Democrats who haven't been the most active in trying to secure funding for ABE, and others obviously who have. And on the other side, we've had some Republican chairs who've been very helpful, and others who have been less than helpful. And today, that is still one of our primary issues. I appreciated the commissioner's notation on preventing reductions in ABE funding, but our legislative agenda still includes having parity with early childhood and K-12, and actually receiving a percentage of funding for ABE when the other funding is increased. In terms of what has changed the most, from my vantage point, representing LAN at the Capitol and recently working with IMABE, it's been the changes in ABE. And it was always basic education. And it's so much more than that. Obviously, we haven't dropped basic education and literacy skills, but interpretive programs, college development, there has been a lot of program changes, and legislators have also appreciated that broad spectrum of education for adults.
One thing I wanted to add about, yes, what our experience has been like. One thing I'd just like to share with people is and which is one of the things that's so sad about having to operate virtually this year from my perspective is, in all the years I've been going down and appearing at committee hearings and watching committee hearings by the hour and so on, it's really, I've always really honestly been struck by the privilege of being able to go to a Capitol and talk to our legislative elected leaders, and may or may not do what we would like them to do, but I can think of very, very few times when I haven't been treated respectfully, or when I have requested a meeting, or Sherry has requested a meeting for me with a legislator when they haven't at least listened to what we had to say. And just going into that Capitol, I know it sounds kind of trite, but it's really true. It's really a very beautiful building, and there's inspiring quotes everywhere. And that sense that this is, at least prior to recently, an open space where we can go to advocate for what we perceive to be the needs of our learners and our society and so on has been, this is a very fulfilling kind of thing to be able to do.
All right, thank you so much. I'm trying to pull up the next question. There we go. Oh, sorry, it's a little bit slow on my end, so it comes up all at once. But so our next question then is, how do your roles complement each other when advocating at the Capitol?
Sherry tells me what to do and I do it. So that's all.
In some ways, in recent years, I've likened it to a sports analogy. This really is a team effort, and in various capacities you hear about teamwork. But Tom and the legislative committee, they act as the coach in terms of setting out some of the plays that we're going to work on during the legislative session. And then I see my role a little bit as the quarterback. So now I've got to run with the ball when they send me up to the Capitol. So LAN, with their legislative committee and membership involvement, establishes an annual legislative agenda. And when there's new issues, Tom and others educate me on issues I'm not familiar with. And then I, in turn, sit down and educate legislators on the issues that you're all dealing with. And Tom's right. Legislators really don't bite. 1 or 2 out of 201. I mean, that's nothing, right? You can get that at the Subway sandwich shop or somewhere. So I think there's a quote. I got to see if I can find it because I pulled it out. And I think for this event particularly, it's an interesting one as you each think about being involved and why would a legislator care. And Representative Rena Moran addressed that issue, how at first she didn't expect to be taken seriously. But Theodore Roosevelt once said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is where advocates, teachers, ABE professionals, student learners really make a big difference, because they not only hear what you're saying about policy or funding, but they get to hear your heart about why their actions are so critical.
I would also say in terms of how Sherry works with members, myself and other members of the legislative committee and so on, is she helps us navigate the process, because the legislative process can be very twisty and turny and complicated and so on. So she helps us know where to appear and who to speak to and so on. And then our role is often more, but not only speaking at hearings, but in getting people, students and learners, students and staff from around the state to speak at hearings when necessary, but also trying to activate our membership and helping and advocating for our own professional colleagues to weigh in on any issues that are important to us.
Thank you.
Add quickly, when we sit in an office together, whether it's Tom joining me or somebody else from LAN joining me, I kind of am the facilitator and open up the dialogue and make the introductions. And then whoever is with me is the expert and fills in all of the gaps. So the legislators get a little bit of all of that.
Thank you. Well, and you've already given some of this advice by reassuring us that legislators don't bite, but what other advice do you have for people who are starting out with advocacy work?
You know, I would say personally, relationships are really important. If you take the time to get to know your legislators ahead of time, to invite them to your program, we really encourage people to do that. Because then when you need to call them or email them about an issue, they know who you are. And, you know, for good or for bad, we all tend to pay more attention to people we know and have some sort of a relationship with. So I think, so that would be, I have two things. I say one, first of all, build relationships with your legislators. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to be complicated, but just do it. You know, and the second thing I would say is don't be afraid. It really is not as nearly as intimidating as people sometimes think it is. It's not that hard to call a legislator or to meet with them in their office, especially if you're with a small group of people who can kind of back you up. So I think people maybe sometimes just feel intimidated by the process. And I would just say there's just no reason to feel, I mean, I'm not doubting that you feel that way, but there's no reality behind that. It really isn't that difficult to do, and especially when you have guidance and help from Sherry and from other members of the committee who have a lot of experience. It's just not that hard.
And I would offer it's the first couple of times you reach out where you're not feeling confident, where it might feel awkward or uncomfortable. But this really is, as Tom said, about developing a relationship. And it's nice to be able to start a relationship, introducing yourself, your program, your students. You don't always have to have an ask, but you do develop that dialogue. So when you send an email, they go, oh, there's Kara, you know, I'm going to see what she wants to hear from me today. And then you can also follow up during the legislative session and say, how's it going on the ABE funding bill? Are we going to get that summer school money, or are there impediments? So that, and then at the end of the session, you always want to thank them because it's what most people forget after it's all said and done, whether you got what you asked for, whether you didn't get what you asked for. When you know they're on your side and they're trying to be helpful, you do want to have a positive relationship and thank them. And other things that help develop that relationship is inviting them to your school, sending them clippings of student activities, graduations, and even sometimes maybe getting something in your local newspaper and then sending them a clipping of that. So there's a lot of ways that you can engage with your legislator where you're not actually asking them for something.
One of the other things I just throw in there that one of the most important lessons I learned from Sherry early on that I pass on to people is you don't have to know everything. And if you happen to be speaking to a legislator or at a hearing and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, just be honest and say, you know, I'm not really sure of that. I'll look it up and get back to you. And then you can follow up with an email the next day, which also gives you the chance to reconnect with them and remind them that you saw them the day before. So you don't have to know absolutely everything about the field in order to be an effective advocate.
Thank you. Let's see, let's get our another question up. There we go. What recommendations do you have for people who are interested in contacting their representatives, and what can they do to make the greatest impact? So
I would
kind of already answered some of this, but I guess thinking about making calls and sending out emails.
starting with an email first is usually the best way. You know, cold calling, whether it's with a legislator or sales call, and they're both basically the same, can be uncomfortable and a little bit awkward. And if the legislator does not have any background in the issue, you know, you might have a conversation that doesn't flow too well. So definitely starting with an email. That doesn't preclude phone conversations later, but frankly, during the legislative session, it can be very difficult to reach legislators by phone. Not impossible, but very difficult, because what are they doing? They're serving on 3-4 committees, and they're spending most of the day between January and May in committees or on the House and Senate floor. And also, don't be afraid to build a relationship with their legislative assistant. Again, whether it's through a phone call, introducing yourself so they get to know who you are. I think our all-time best staff advocate was Pat Thomas. She made 2 trips a year, I think, to the Capitol, and her focus was always to talk to staff. And so staff is very important in helping you get to legislators sometimes, so don't overlook staff. And the same when you have an appointment. When you do come to the Capitol for in-person meetings, sometimes the schedules get messed up. As an example, it happens to me. I've had 2 appointments canceled with a legislator because her committee schedule changed. And now my new appointment is after the bill will be heard in her committee. So not as productive as you would like, but it isn't an indication that they don't care. And so you again use your email to provide information. And if people need help, either through IMABE or through LAN, I'm happy to help people figure out who their legislators are, provide email addresses so that you can contact them. And I would kind of issue as a challenge for 2021 for everybody to make 2 legislative contacts. So your House member and your Senate member. And probably many of you could easily make 4 contacts, because you might live in one district and work in another district. And so when you're contacting legislators, you can let them know that your program is in their district or that you're a constituent in their district.
People may already know this. I don't know if everybody does, but there was, the governor did include in his budget a special one-time $10 million allocation for ABE. I doubt we'll get that much, but hopefully we'll get something. So if you are contacting your legislator, I think it would be really important to make the argument that, you know, that money is really important to us. We're talking a lot about how that will help us meet, it's in the summer school bill, but we're saying we'd like to be able to spend it throughout the year to do 2 things. And one is to improve our technology resources for learners, being able to buy laptops and hotspots and instructional services and so on. And the other second aspect is building capacity within the field to add new kinds of services, new career pathways, new things that need to be done. So just be aware of that. And the other thing I would say is the question about contacting your representatives, especially if you're sending an email, it doesn't have to be pages long. In fact, I think it shouldn't be. Like many of you, I'm on a lot of national email lists for various left of center political groups, and they will send these long emails that you're supposed to call your senator and say all these things, and they're not going to listen. You never even get through that. Just a short email with a brief message: please vote this, please support this for this reason. Let me know if you have any other questions. I personally think is really adequate and probably more effective than a very long email that they're not going to read anyway. So when we send out legislative alerts, I try really conscientiously to keep them relatively brief. We try to provide enough information so that everyone in the field at least knows the background, so they understand what's going on. But the message we ask that people try to get to the legislators doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be, I don't think, really long and complex. So.
Yeah, thank you. Well, those are our pre-arranged questions, but we do have time for anyone in the audience if you'd like to put a question in the chat for Tom and Sherry. And I guess I have one to get us started. So you mentioned contacting our representative and our senator about this proposed funding from the governor. Is there any other policies that we should be talking to our legislators about?
I think we'll probably be sending out an alert in the next, fairly short period of time. We also have a bill but our thought is that if we are able to get a one-time bump in funding, then when that expires, we were hoping that we would be able to get the funding we were trying to get for several years, so we would get the same annual increase that K-12 gets. So there is a bill, I don't remember the number, although Sherry probably does, that we're able to get introduced to do that very thing. So asking people to support that would be important. And then, of course, the ongoing coalition to support expanding the number of teachers of color is not the main plank in our platform, but we are supportive, and we have sent messages around that and continue to try to advocate for that.
Yeah.
I would just concur in terms of ABE. It's not exactly the same level or percentage that K-12 gets, but the percentage, kind of a portion of that ECFE gets, and we're looking for something similar. And that's basically, we're looking at inflation growth, right? So if you keep the same amount of money year after year, you have a diminishing return. And the Department of Education hasn't always been our best friend in terms of putting that forward with the governor. So this year, when we saw their $10 million proposal, we were very excited. We had meetings with leadership at the department, and it was like, finally, they're listening. This is very, very rewarding to everybody in the field to see that money. And the challenge is going to be securing that. I mean, $10 million is a lot of money, even though the budget is much improved compared to when the governor developed his budget. So you would think it shouldn't be that hard to get 10, but it will be. And the question is, where will that land? And this is where probably the most important thing for funding this year. I would say this is it. I think it'll be difficult with the uncertainty of the budget and the pandemic to get that percentage change put into law for future bienniums. That's not one-time money, that's a forever change. But getting this one-time money is critical. And we just have been talking to legislators about making sure the money is not there only for the summer and into the fall, but for the entire year.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And one of the senators in the video we watched is my Senator Jason Isaacson, and I had a good chat with him after we recorded those questions about a lot of this stuff. And so, they're interested in talking to us, and it's nice to get a meeting virtually face-to-face with folks. So I would really encourage everyone who's listening in. And then we do have a question in the chat for Sherry. So Sherry, when you quarterback that football for ABE, what does that look like? You mentioned committee meetings, et cetera, but could you give us a day in the life?
Oh, okay. Well, this year isn't a very fair comparison because I spent a lot of time on the computer trying to reach legislators, scheduling Zoom meetings, one-on-one appointments with legislators or groups of people with legislators. But it's really difficult not being present in the building because you are stuck or trapped within this very specified time zone. And you generally have 10 or 15 minute Zoom meetings with a legislator. And generally they sign on 5 minutes late and they try to get off on time. And so there isn't a lot of time, but I will give them credit. Most of them are trying to make this work. But at the Capitol, kind of a day in the life depends a little bit on the timing of session. At the beginning of session, taking Land's legislative agenda, looking for a legislator who will support that by being an author. So that's the beginning of the process. Having a legislator who's willing to carry the bill for us during session. I may not go to the revisor's office and have a bill drafted without legislator approval. And then the bill goes to the legislator. So there's no cheating on this. You have to make sure that you have an arrangement there. And then after you have the bill, we generally bring it back to the committee. It's a draft bill, make sure it says what we want, make changes, and then have it jacketed, they call it, for introduction. And in the House, it's yellow jackets, and in the Senate, it's green jackets. Reverse that, it's the opposite. And then we have the bill introduced. Then after the bill is introduced, it's referred to a committee. So with ABE, it's generally going to go to one of two committees, either the education policy or the education finance. Then it's following up with the author, and it's their staff that I reach out to make sure they request a hearing. You wouldn't believe it. This is one of those things you just can't assume happens. A lot of times you have a legislator who's introducing 30, 40 bills and things get lost on the desk. And so it's our job to make sure the hearing request. And am I getting too minuscule here? Is this okay? Okay, so then securing the hearing and finding testifiers for the bill. Generally, I don't testify because we want an expert there who can answer the questions when they come up. And when we have the opportunity, we like multiple testifiers. We try to spread that out. So, you know, if you have a teacher, an administrator, a student, greater Minnesota metro area, the legislators represent these different categories, and we like the testifiers to also show that there's some breadth there. And then trying to catch legislators, you don't always get an appointment, but the nice thing about being at the Capitol is you can stand out the chamber, and many of you have done that with me. Stand out in front of the House or the Senate, send in a note, ask the legislator to come out. Most of the time they will. Sometimes they honestly can't come out because of the debate on the floor. And occasionally some legislators don't believe in leaving the chamber while they're sitting there watching the bill debate. So that's another way to catch people. And that's what I miss most right now, is that ability to catch people, say hello in the hall. Just like you as advocates, for me, it's important to keep up personal relationships. And this was an interesting year. We started a legislative session after an election with about 30 new legislators that I've never met, except for by phone or by Zoom, which is a little different.
Wow. Well, thank you. Are there any other questions from our audience?
Just one thing I want to say, if anybody is ever considering whether they would be willing to testify in person when needed, please let us know that, because Sherry or I or another member of the legislative committee is more than happy to take the time to kind of walk you through the process ahead of time, to help you, know what to expect, to, calm your nerves down and so on. So we want to continue to grow the number of advocates that we have who will feel comfortable when needed to testify or call a legislator and talk with them.
And I would add to that, if it's your first time testifying and Tom or somebody else from LAN who has experiences testifying, you can go up to the table with them. Mm-hmm. So they will go first, and then you'll be able to go second, and then you don't have to worry so much about questions that might come up. But truly remember what Tom said. I don't always have the answers, so I tell him I'll get back to him. What does hurt is when you stumble trying to make up an answer because you feel compelled you have to do it on the spot. Legislators know that you aren't going to have all the answers, and they don't mind if you get back to them later. And frankly, legislators want to hear from you. How could they possibly be an expert in all subject areas? Environment, transportation, education. I mean, it's just not possible. So they depend on advocates to teach them.
Thank you.
Say hi to your cat.
Oh, yeah, I know. My cat joined me, so if anyone wants to say hi. And you've got a puppy?
We got a puppy. He's waiting for his walk a little later.
Yeah, this one joins me on all of my calls, so people are very familiar with her. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of that with us. I guess going once, going twice. Any more questions? Otherwise, I think we're ready to move on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hope to see you all at the Capitol.
All right. I think we're now ready to move on and start talking about some materials we have for you guys.
All right. And so one of the things, here we go, I'm back. Yes, one of the things that we are talking about is, oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead, but coming back to this. So you can get involved through a couple of the ways that Tom and Sherry just shared. In addition to that, by being at today's event, you're involved. You can also teach about the legislative process to your students. So the more informed our student population and general population is about some of these legislative issues and different points of contact, the more effectively we're all able to engage with the process. As Tom and Sherry mentioned, you can invite legislators into your classroom, and you can contact your legislators. And I'll give a quick plug. One of the breakout sessions we have later is all about becoming an ABE advocate. So if you've been intrigued by what Tom and Sherry have shared and you want to get into the details of all of that and sort of brainstorm what are things you want to advocate for and how you can do it, we'll have a session on that in addition to our session on funding. And the other thing is that IMABE has put together some resources for you to teach about the legislative process in your classrooms. We have 2 levels of materials in a toolkit. So we've got lesson plans for like a beginning to high beginning level class, and then also lesson plans for an intermediate to advanced level class that we're going to overview quickly for you. And then you will also get action item emails from us this month. Since we can't go to the Capitol and track down those legislators today, we're hoping that we can use the time throughout March to try and set personal goals to reach out. And if it goes past March, that's great too. You'll be able to access this and more at the IMABE website. So the URL is right there. And I think we can probably get that in the chat for you as well. I'll quickly give you an overview on the level 2 lesson plan. So like I said, this is high, intermediate to advanced. You could also use it in your GED class, pair it with one of your social studies lessons if any of you teach that. And the way that it looks, I'm just going to give you an overview. It's a Google document, and it's got the standards and all of your objectives and that good stuff. And then it's designed to be what I call an accordion lesson. So I call those accordion lessons, those lessons where they can be as long or as short as you need them to be. And so you can kind of pick and choose to see what works for your classroom. Because some of you are teaching for an hour, some of you are teaching for 3 hours, and you are the best determiner of what works in your class. The lesson plan's designed so that the activities have 4 options. There are ideas for what you can do in person. There are ideas for those of you who are doing low tech or no tech. So we're thinking like, do you get on a phone call? Are you on WhatsApp chatting with students? That kind of level. Maybe you teach a beginning class where they don't have the ability to maybe navigate a lot of the tech systems. We also have medium tech. That will be for a class where you're able to get everyone onto something like a video platform. Maybe they can use the chat function, but you don't want them navigating away from the video platform you're on because they'll never come back. And then we've got the high tech option. And this is for people who are comfortable, maybe doing some asynchronous digital navigating, maybe moving between different screens. And so a sample of that is we've got a PowerPoint on US government that's focused on a lot of what we're talking about today here in terms of the Minnesota legislature, as well as the broader branches of government that you can use as an introduction activity. We ask that you insert the representatives that are in your school district or are most relevant to your participants to personalize it. And then a sample of some of the lesson plan ideas. So in person, you could either project the PowerPoint or you could have students do a reading. That's also in the lesson plan. These have options. You can kind of read this. I won't read it all to you for you to like get folks in groups, have students do some writing. In comparison, the low tech or no tech version of this would be you either print the PowerPoint slides or a reading and you maybe are doing packet deliveries. If you can't deliver, you can read out loud to students and then discuss the reading over the phone. Another example for the medium tech level is you could use breakout rooms and have students navigate with you to find their representative. And then a high tech level activity might be having your students go into breakout rooms and then giving them the link and having them look up for themselves rather than through and all the class does it together in a screen share option. So that's just a small insight into one part of the lesson. The level 2 lesson plan has a whole bunch of different activities in it. So you can decide if you want to do a listening activity, a reading activity, a discussion activity. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about what the level 1 lesson plan looks like for those of you who are maybe working with students at the beginning or low intermediate level.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kaya. And actually, would you be able to go through the slides as I talk? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so as Kaya said, the second lesson plan we have is targeted at a lower level of English language proficiency. We're level 2 targeted high or intermediate to advanced. The level 1 lesson aims at beginning and intermediate English language. And by beginning, we're talking about not pre-literate. So it sort of assumes a basic level of literacy in a student's home or first language. The structure of the lesson plan, as you can see there, is very similar to the level 2, with the same activity options for different technology contexts you and your student may be learning within. So we have the same assumptions there for all 3: in person, low tech, no tech, medium tech, and then high tech. It looks pretty significantly different to the level 2 in terms of what those activities actually would be. For a high tech reality, we're not assuming that lower level literacy learners would be toggling between tabs, for example, but they may be able to write an email. So, or send an email or send you an email. So that's an example of one of those assumptions. So the lesson plans, as I said, they're assuming past a pre-literate English level, but we've also included suggestions within the lesson for how to scaffold even more and level up slightly, depending on what your students, where your students' levels are. You can see there, I have a couple of examples of, we have a separate PowerPoint that gets at a very basic civics lesson and then gears towards really learning about how even a lower level literacy learner can communicate with their legislators. So when you look in this level, it's similar to the level 2. You'll notice there are many opportunities to expand the lesson, as Kai said, to multi-day or even a full unit. And finally, the goal of the lesson plan is the same as level 2. We're really looking here to help enable you to provide you as teachers a resource to help your students learn how to get their voices heard in government, so they can share what's important to them. We don't address voting specifically in this lesson, but it's something that as an accompaniment or an alternative to voting, that they can be very tangibly involved. Yeah, so that's the level 1. And I think now I'll turn it back to you, Kaya, for the next piece.
All right, yeah, thanks. So we'll be providing this toolkit to you, and we really encourage you to take the parts that work for you, adjust the parts that don't work for you, and kind of collaborate with us on this process. And what we are going to do now, we're actually, I think, ahead of schedule, which is great. But
Kaya, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah, Chris, go for it.
If you and Sarah, or I know Kara was involved in the higher level lesson as well, we'll talk about some of the outcomes. So I really appreciate the level of detail that you both put into explaining how flexible these lessons are. I love the idea of an accordion lesson plan, because we all totally do that. But what is it that the students, how do they, towards the end of the lesson, engage with the advocacy process? What are the sort of, the only word that's coming to me right now is outcomes, but you know what I mean, the products. What do they do that then connects them and gets them involved in advocacy?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. The sort of place that you're building to with these lessons is your students feeling like they have something that they can communicate to legislators and know how they can do that. And so there are some options for you to do, like send an email to a legislator, to write a letter to a legislator. One of the things that's included in there are, if you have printing capacity and are able to connect with students that way, they can send little postcards to their legislator that give an overview. And so it's about understanding who makes decisions, and in general, in students' lives, like who makes decisions around a lot of the things that we as a society need to function. And then specifically, specifically in adult basic education. And then, our hope is that you and your students are able to connect with legislators through writing something or inviting them into the class and being able to communicate those goals and asks to a legislator directly.
Yeah, and then for specifically the lower level, and the higher level gets at this too, obviously, but it's really, like Kai said, making that connection between what's important to a student in their learning goals and in the community in which they live, and then who their legislators are, first of all, and what they can influence. So based on what's important to them, the lesson gets at, okay, it makes the connection between the legislator and the things they can influence, and then what the student feels is their priorities or what's important to them. It makes that connection to enable them to communicate through those letters or email or postcard or poster what the students' priorities are. So.
Great, thank you. Would you both be willing to answer any questions? I can't actually see the chat since I'm the ones sharing my screen, but we can also open it up to people if they have questions about the lesson plans before we move on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I'll say the thing too with these lesson plans and with everything we're doing today, we've kind of given, I'm a person who likes a deadline, so we've kind of given the benchmark of March to be a space to try and do this work, but it works year round. And I think, like Sherry and Tom communicated, you might actually have better luck getting legislators to come into your classrooms, not right at this moment, since we are in the middle of the legislative sessions right now. So
Yeah, and what we've been thinking too is that it may make sense if you have flexibility in your unit structure to plonk this in as something separate, but it also could be a great supplemental lesson chunk or lesson bit that you integrate into a community lesson, or if you have a swap in swap out physics lesson, you might be able to incorporate, as Kaya said, some of these activities or the whole kit and caboodle. So
Alrighty. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat so far about the lesson, so I think we can keep moving, but please do, if you have a question, put that in there, and you can direct it at Kaya or Sarah, or you can chat it out to everybody. Yeah. And these are all on the IMABE website, so they're there for you to download, and all the materials and everything that goes along with them are there free to you. All right. And then I think who's taking us on? Kaya? Yeah, there we go.
I can do that. Yeah. So we are going to do some breakout sessions next. And as I mentioned before, we've got two options for you. You'll get to choose the option that works best. We have Put the Fun in ABE Funding, a presentation with Chris and myself. For those of you who are interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of how does funding work for ABE, you heard Tom mention the funding formula. So we'll be getting into that, as well as sort of the question of what does something like a pandemic do to our hours? I think a lot of us have gotten more up to speed with that this year than ever before, but hopefully we can share some details with you. And then the other presentation is Becoming an ABE Advocate with Kara and Aaron. And Kara, I'll let you maybe promo that one.
Yeah, sounds good. So this is really gonna tailor in well with all of the stuff you heard from Tom and Sherry, and you'll get a bit about like my own experience as an advocate as an advocate as well. And so we'll talk in more detail about strategies and ways that you can get involved with advocacy.
All right. And I guess I have a question. Yeah, you can get the materials for the session that we don't go to. We have recordings of both of these as well, and we'll be able to send that out. Good question. So I guess my question is for us, since we're at 5:15 right now, are we interested in reconvening at 5:30, or do we want to come back at 5:45? And I guess I'm polling everyone on the fly.
On the fly. I think that just bumping things up a little bit, we tried to give a nice cushion for our panelists. Panels are always a little difficult to gauge how long that they're going to take. And so I know everybody's probably chomping at the bit to get out into this great weather before it's totally dark. So I'm definitely in favor of moving things up and getting our breakout sessions going at 5:30. Any other?
It looks like that's the winning vote in the chat as well.
Okay, great.
So thank you to everyone. And yeah, take a moment, run to the restroom, grab tea, do what you need to do, and we will see you at 5:30. You can choose your breakout room then.
Just quickly before you do go, you should be able to pick your breakout room when you return. But Sarah might need to move some folks if you don't have the newest updates. So this is what it's going to look like. So if you want to try to get into your breakout room, we are going to take that 15-minute break. But if you want to try to get into your breakout room, and then if it does not work for you, once Sarah opens them, you can chat directly to her which breakout room you want to be in, and then she will move folks around.
Well, let's say maybe more like 10 minutes from now. Let's try to start at 5:30.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, and thanks to everyone who came. I know not everyone's going to stay for these, so if you have to leave, thank you for coming.
Sarah, if you want to, we can stop the recording while everyone's taking a break, and then we'll be in the breakout room